All right, good afternoon. It's 4 o'clock. Thank you for logging on to supporting social emotional learning at home. Um, Before we get started, I just want to go over a couple of protocols. We are going to be taking questions in the chat box. After the conclusion of today's program, tomorrow probably, you'll be getting a copy of the video recording as well as a couple of resources that our presenter, Dr. Debbie Grimshaw, put together, including a template that looks super useful. And I would like to encourage you all to put questions in the chat box and share any resources that you might have in there. Just make sure that when you do so, you are typing to all panelists and attendees to share um, with your colleagues. I'll be sending the chat transcript out, so definitely share resources and helpful things and maybe not air grievances because everybody will be able to read it. Yep, this will be recorded, Stephanie, and you can share with your colleagues, with your friends, fellow teachers, and so on. And so without taking up any more of your time, I'm going to turn you over to today's presenter, Dr. Debbie Grimshaw. Thank you.
Thanks, Jerome. Welcome, everyone. Coming to you live from my house, my spare bedroom and office combined. So, like you, we have learned very quickly here that some very important things happen when you do webinars, and one is lighting. So we're working on lighting, and hopefully today we got it right so all of you can see what we're doing. Also, the screen is shared for today's PowerPoint. So in this quick hour, I'm going to share information with you about how you can support social emotional learning for your students and their families. Just a couple of logistical points. As Jerome said, near the end of the hour, we'll entertain a few questions that are commonly asked, if there are any. But if you have a question that you would like a personal response to, or if you're watching this video later, I would encourage you to email me at the email address on this slide. I'll have it again at the end of this session. The same invitation applies. I'd be happy to respond directly to any of you who have questions. I think it's really important now that we support each other the best we can. As Jerome also stated, I've created a resource guide for this presentation. It includes a summary, references that form the foundation for our work today, more about my credentials to do this work, and the social emotional learning protocol and protocol template. So the resource is yours to use and modify as appropriate for your setting, and I really hope you find it helpful. So today, you don't have to take a lot of notes if you don't want to, because all the information will be coming to you tomorrow, but let's get right to it, and we'll do our work together around social emotional learning at home. As soon as I get to where the next slide goes. There we go. We have two outcomes today. One is to consider social emotional learning as a set of skills. And this might be a little bit different, or an aha moment, or a change of mindset for you. Today's webinar does not include a counseling or therapeutic base. I am not a counselor. It is a skills-based program. If you would like additional webinars on social emotional learning with a therapeutic or counseling orientation, please let CASDA know. I'm sure we can arrange it for you. But this is about social emotional learning being considered as a set of skills. The second area to share with you is a protocol and a template for creating a 15 to 20 minute social emotional learning activity you can do with your students or share with their families for them to use. The elements of the protocol will most likely not be new to you. They will be friendly. What it should be is a tool that you didn't have to create or make yourself. You all have enough to do out there in the world. This was the intention, was to help you with something that's already created that you can use with your families. The protocol is designed for a whole family use if that would be appropriate. So as I was putting it together for you, I was thinking about my sister, who is right now homeschooling her 4th grader and her 6th grader in New Jersey, and how they like to look for activities they could do all together. It maximizes their learning time and maximizes her time as she's trying to work from home. The intention is to provide you with something you can turn around and use tomorrow if you wanted to. So let's start with considering the area of social emotional learning as a set of skills. And to do that, we're going to look at the brain. Why the brain? Well, actually, the brain has a lot to do with our social emotional responses and reactions. The frontal cortex of our brain is where all of our highest order thinking occurs. It's the part of the brain we use to do our best thinking and make our best decisions. It's also part of the brain that allows us to access the social emotional skills that we have. Processing emotions is the work of the amygdala. It's that walnut looking shaped part of the brain, which specifically handles survival instinct and memory and our emotions. The amygdala is important. Here's what happens in the brain. When things are going great, we are using our frontal cortex, we are making good decisions, we are using our social emotional skills, and life is just motoring right along. When we feel threatened or when we are concerned, we start to revert to our primal responses: flight, fight, or freeze, situations that cause us to lose some of our good decision-making ability. First, we become emotional, and that limits our social emotional response options. And if we fear, like we did back in the day, we were being eaten by a tiger or a woolly mammoth, then we go right to survival mode, and our available choices become even more limited. What happens in the brain is our response pattern starts to downshift. And that downshifting has been characterized a bunch of different ways. You may have heard it characterized as an elevator or an escalator going down. Or my personal favorite, the Tootsie Pop. The hard candy coating on the outside is our frontal cortex. It's strong when it's strong. However, when we enter the primal response mode in our amygdala, we go right to the chewy, mushy center. It's our biology. And evolution has not changed our brain in that regard. Though we no longer have to worry about being eaten by tigers or woolly mammoths, there are other stressors in our day-to-day lives that cause us to have emotional and then survival reactions. So the point of social emotional learning is it helps keep us in our highest brain with the calmest capacity. It allows us to access and use our social emotional skills, which helps us then have better outcomes. In 2018, the New York State Department of Education, something you probably are all aware of, published 2 documents regarding social emotional learning. The guidance document is included in your resource guide. State Ed worked with a collaborative known as CASEL, the Collaborative for Academic and Social Emotional Learning Group, also in your resource guide, to develop a definition of social emotional learning for New York State. Within that, there are some key words that I'd like to share with you that help frame how we define social emotional learning. The first, that it's a process. It's a process for children and for us as adults to think about how we are reacting and where we are using our social emotional skills every day. It's not going to happen overnight. I don't know. I've been living a long time on this earth. I'm still working on my social emotional learning sometimes. But it's where we can acquire and apply skills that help us in our daily life. And those skills help us manage and understand our emotions, feel and show empathy towards others, establish and maintain positive relationships, and make responsible decisions. One key difference in integrating social emotional learning from other content areas or other areas of instruction is that it also does require us to look at ourselves and our response patterns and our interactions. What are the skills we use when we find ourselves moving into that chewy center of our Tootsie Pop brain? That's a whole different conversation, perhaps a webinar for another time. For the purposes of today, however, we're going to focus on providing families with a way to consider social emotional learning skills. However, in a more normal context, we would also want to look at ourselves. So now that we've defined social emotional learning, let's take a look at it as a skill set. Consider how social emotional skills were developed in you or not. For most of us, it was trial and error. We learn some skills really well, and others, well, perhaps they are still a work in progress. In a world that's different in our time growing up from our students' world, with parenting skills for some of us that are different than what some of you who are parents now are facing, what we know is that some of our children need the opportunity to learn how to deal with their emotions, show empathy, have positive relationships, and make good decisions. It is interesting to me that this concept of where kids are in dealing with social emotional learning is really something that's on the national forefront. For example, this month's Atlantic magazine, which arrived at my house just over the weekend, very timely, has an article about childhood anxiety and about parenting during not only these times, but recent times in our history. Parenting and, childhood anxiety and depression are on the rise. I really probably don't need to tell you that. You have experienced that every day in your classroom. The point of the article is not only is that on the rise, but parenting can also be a huge challenge in this time when kids are facing and families are facing things that are not part of what some of us may have experienced or grown up with. And certainly as we are dealing with the current COVID-19 pandemic, which is new for everybody, that is an additional stressor and something we need to pay attention to. So if we think about social emotional learning as a skill set, we can put it into the buckets along with other academic areas. If a student had difficulty with math, for example, we would teach them the math skills they were missing or the math skills they needed to learn to move forward. If a student had difficulty with reading, we would also teach those reading skills so that they could be effective readers. The reality is, we are teaching social emotional skills. You're doing it anyway. The difference is that now this skill area is being seen as a part of and an integral part of the overall learning process. No different than teaching reading skills and math skills. In the classroom, when you all were there with all of your children, you know that you were spending time every day helping students manage their emotions, build positive relationships, show empathy towards others, make good decisions. Those things were already happening. And now we're being asked to help our kids learn at home and help their families help their children learn at home. So when we think about social emotional skills as a skill area that we can address, we also want to think about how to do it in a way that helps our families. The protocol we're going to look at in a little later, I hope, will help you do that work. So we're going to consider the SEL skill set from 3 resources, 2 that are combined, New York State and the CASEL framework, and a second one that is from an ASCD publication, All Learning is Social and Emotional. This book is also in your reference or your guidance document. These resources are helpful to help us think about the skills that are included in social emotional learning. So we're going to identify those from 2 different perspectives and then talk about how we can use them with our families. So the first skill set is from the New York State guidance document that was built in collaboration with the Collaborative for Academic and Social Emotional Learning. I'll refer to it now as CASEL for the rest of the presentation. There are 5 big areas with skills delineated in each area. So there's self-awareness. How do we know about our emotions? How do we know about our strengths? Where are we with our confidence? There's self-management. What do we do and how do we react when we have impulses or we want to do something that might not be the best choice? How do we persevere? How do we set goals and accomplish them? How do we make responsible decisions? How do we learn to identify problems and analyze them and come up with solutions and make the best choice for us? How do we have healthy relationships that include good communication and resolving conflicts and learning how to help others or seek help? How do we have social awareness? How do we learn what it's like to be somebody else in their shoes, in their experience, which may be similar to ours or different from ours. It's helpful to have a breakdown of each skills in these component areas. So the question becomes, when we take a look at what a child is presenting to us, what is the skill that the child is missing? And how can I help them learn it? And let's go back to our brain for a minute. If a child doesn't have a skill to use when they start to downshift, what do? They revert back or downshift to skills or behaviors they know, even if those skills aren't particularly helpful or useful to them in their current situation. And really, that's kind of what we all do. Because whether you're a child or an adult, there are certain parts of our brain function that are the same. So if you take a moment to think about this for yourself, what choices or actions do you sometimes take that you know in your frontal cortex, in your very best brain, aren't the best, but they're the ones you use because you know them? My own personal example are feelings of stress, extreme stress, that are feelings that sometimes I have. I know what to do. My frontal cortex knows you take a walk, you call a friend, you do some other distracting activity. I know that. But my go-to would be to go buy a box of those Little Debbie oatmeal cookies and just about eat the whole package at once. Didn't help with the stress, wasn't what I knew was the right thing to do to help me manage my emotions in that moment, but it's what I knew and it felt comfortable. That's what's happening for students. When they don't have a different skill that's been practiced, and in my case, it really has, that I now don't do the Little Debbie oatmeal cookies anymore. I have practiced and learned another skill set response. Our students will revert back to what they're missing, what they know, because the skill is missing. Another model of the social emotional learning skill set comes from Fry, Fisher, and Smith in the book that I just shared with you, and it looks a little bit different. This reference is also listed in your resource guide. They organize social emotional skills in a slightly different manner. As you'll see, they have 4 areas: identity and agency, public spirit, emotional regulation, and cognitive regulation. If you look at the specific skills within their 4 areas, you'll see they're very similar to what is in the New York State CASEL construct. So there are things like self-confidence, there are things like helping others, respect for others, communication, empathy. All of those skills are very similar. It's just presented in a slightly different manner. This question, though, is still the same. What is the skill that the child is missing, and how can we help that child learn that skill, practice that skill, and have a different response when they need it? In this time of learning at home, we can help children build awareness and definition of these skills. At this time, I believe that that's the appropriate level of learning. There's enough right now for you to do and our families to do to go beyond that. You really don't need to go beyond that very much, but it is helpful for families to work on some of these things as a unit if they so choose. When we're looking at the protocol, we're going to do 2 things. First, I'm going to share with you an explanation of the 3 steps and then show an example. And again, these documents will be available for you to use following this webinar. The specific skills that you might choose to identify would be ones that you would choose, or you might give your families a choice of, because you know your students and you know your families. That's not something that I can offer to you because I don't know your kids and their families the same way you do. However, with the information that you now have about what social emotional skills are, what some models are that define them and give you some examples, and how your brain is really impacted by social emotional learning and your responses to what goes on every day, we can help students and help families during this very difficult time. At the very least, build awareness and definition for some of these skills. So let's take a look. The protocol is a compilation of different learning strategies most of which are familiar to you. They aren't going to be new. That wasn't the point. The point was that I could put them together for you so you could use them. In my conversations with families and teachers who are still practicing, we know the strain, or I have heard about the strain that is happening. Trying to learn new ways to do business, like webinars, trying to maintain relationships and communications with families, and for some of you, trying to also educate your own children at home has put an unusual strain that we've not really ever experienced before in our profession. And while that is true, what we also know is that you are doing amazing and, quite frankly, heroic things. People think education has not been able to progress or move forward. I think we've all shown everyone that in a very short order, we can do just that and still strive to meet the needs of our students. So the intent of this protocol is that it is something that you can use. You can modify it, you can change it, you could not use it, it's all up to you, but you can use it personally with your own children, with your students, or share it with your family so that they have something they can use as well. Learning and using social emotional skills is an active process. So this protocol involves activity and some choice. While it is appropriate for all ages, parents may find that younger children are more agreeable, unless you're bribing the older children with food or some other activities. Older students, and I'm thinking of upper middle school, high school students, can be part of the family activities or maybe lead the family activities. That may help out the younger children. That may help them be a part of something, but yet not think that they're the same as some of their perhaps younger siblings. Or they may just want to join in. It really all depends on what that family structure is like, how that family works, and what they might want to do with this protocol. So the first step is to identify and define the skill or the sub-skill that you might want to work on. And I'm going to go through the 3 steps first, and then I will share with you a specific example. So you could use the skill sets that are part of either the CASEL or the Frye Fisher Smith model, or you could look at a subset of one of those skills. So the skills apply to either, or I'm sorry, excuse me, the skill sets apply either one you can use. Also, there is a space for the adult and for the child. So for the adult, the first thing we want to think about is how do we define this skill? What's our take on it? And why is that important? It's important because we have our own definition, and our definition may be different than our child's. So what we want to do is make sure we're building a common understanding of what this skill means. It's also important for the child or the children to identify what does insert the name of the skill mean? How do they define it? That is really important, and it is a way that they can think about what that skill means to them. Now, if it's a skill that they don't have or they're not sure about, that might be something that then the adults, either that you as the teachers or their families, can help them with a definition. But it's important that everybody understands the same thing. Step 2 is about identify how the skill is part of everyday life. We are social beings, most of us. We like to be around people to some degree. That's why now, particularly, it's difficult for us not to be in contact with others. So we need to understand that. We also need to understand that children operate from their own worldview, and it is important to get a picture and their picture of the skill. So our brain, we like pictures, we like visuals. If you notice, a lot of this webinar slide deck is pictures. It's not all as much pictures as I would like because we are recording it and we want to have enough information out there to share with others. But we know that our brains like to think in pictures and they like to think in visuals. So we want to know what the child thinks the skill looks like and sounds like. So from their perspective, what does it look like if you pictured yourself being kind to someone else? what would you see and what would you hear? What you see and what you hear help the child form a mental image of what that social emotional skill is. Again, if the child has a misperceived or mistaken picture of this skill, the adult then can support that by perhaps offering a different picture. This may be an additional opportunity to provide actual pictures of what the skill looks like. And for my special education colleagues who might be on this call, it is a very common practice that we use in that realm to help give a visual support to students on what something looks like that they are working towards. If a child is challenged to provide a picture verbally, perhaps the child can draw it with a picture, or if they're older and they're agreeable to participate in this activity, make them use symbols. That's another higher level form of visual and language that they can use. If now that we have a picture and we have clarity about how the child might see the skill, we can think about step 3 and the action that it might take. So step 3 is make it real and show it. This is differentiated instruction by product. As I already told you, there's nothing new here that you don't already know. The intent is to provide it for you so you don't have to create it or think about it. It's just something that you can use. A family of several children can learn about the same skill, show it, and explain it at whatever developmental level they are at. So let's think about this for a minute through the lens of physical education. Physical education, by nature of this content area, is really a progression of skills. It is a process. At the youngest level, children learn the fundamentals, how to catch, throw, and kick a ball, for example. In upper elementary to middle level education, these skills are then applied to organize activities such as basketball or soccer. And at that same time, we begin to introduce the complexity of game rules and game plays to the context of the skill. We take the foundation, we add to it. At the high school level, we are also using these skills in a game format with the expectation that students are using game rules. More complex plays are taught, and more complex rules are followed, and the game builds. Social emotional learning is a little bit like that. At our youngest levels, we're helping students identify their feelings and define them. As they grow, we're also teaching them how to use their feelings and their skills to help them make good decisions. And certainly as they reach the complexity and the time of adolescence, we are adding to that skill set, and hopefully students are using and children are using those skills in ways that help them continue to develop as high functioning adults. If there's breakdowns along the way, that's where social emotional learning can help fill that gap. So to make it easier, the adults can give a choice of 3 different activities. And I'd like you all now to think about what activities are appropriate for the students that you serve. I fully recognize and realize that there are probably resource equity issues that some of you are facing. Not all of our students have access, nor do their families have access to resources that would allow them to do big fancy pants things. And quite frankly, families don't have the time or the energy right now to do it anyway. So in the list that it will be part of your resource guide, I've kept some suggestions, very simple, very easy, and very quick. Why? Because that's what we all have time to do right now, and that's what we all have the mental and emotional energy to handle right now. While we're doing this work, it's important that we stay in the hard candy coating of our Tootsie Pop brain and not sink right down into the gooey, mushy center. So that's the explanation of the 3-step protocol. Once the student has and makes their choice for one of the activities that they would like to do, we want to process with them on how the activity that they have chosen shows that social emotional skill. So for example, for this one, given a choice. So perhaps let's say the student chose to work on kindness, or that was the skill we were working on, how to be kind to others, right? Some really easy actions would be to do something in your community, or perhaps something to help out a neighbor safely, following all the guidelines we need to do now. But you might have a student who's really creative, who thinks about kindness in a very different format and might choose to create an interpretive dance or a little dance about kindness, maybe using a song that involves kindness. That's something that doesn't take a lot of time. It might take the child a little bit of time to do, but it's a very active and very engaging activity. Again, this is something that I know you all know. I'm just trying to put it into a format for you that is easy to use. So how important is that for kids? It gives kids a break. It gives families a break. It gives families a thing to do together. And one of the things you may be noticing, as I am on social media, people are starting to get very creative and looking for creative outlets in the things that they do. So as we consider some of these options for children to show a skill or to show what it might mean to engage with that skill, we know creativity is out there, and it's a great opportunity to allow children to use their creativity in a way that they can do by themselves or perhaps with their whole family. So that's the explanation of the three-step protocol. You identify the skill, you identify how it's part of everyday life and how the child or children see it and define it, and then you make it real, and then you show it. The more actionable it can become, obviously, the more integrated it gets into our brain, and it's something then that we can rely on when we are faced with another situation or making a decision somewhere down the road or learning how to respond to things. It gives us something that we have done that we can fall back to or use again. So that's the explanation, and here's an example. I chose an example using a subset skill that I think might be applicable now. I can do something hard. In this example, I am the adult, and the child is a representative fourth grader who also happens to be my delightful niece, who's currently being schooled at home by her mother. So I'm going to go through this example and we'll see how it works. So for me, I know that something hard is this webinar. I've not done one before in this manner. While I have done a lot of professional development, it has always been in front of people. I think you all know what I'm talking about. So to do something that is being recorded and where I can't see all of you is something that's really hard. But I can do something hard, and I did. I can learn how to use a Zoom meeting, and I can learn how to share a screen, and I can learn how to make sure the lighting is as good as we can get it. So that's something that I can do. So I know that I can do something hard because I've done other hard things in my life. Oops, sorry. Sorry about that. And because it's hard, it means you're going to make mistakes. So I skipped too fast. So the first piece is doing something hard, which is a skill set or a sub-skill of perseverance. For a child, it might be learning new soccer moves with my team is hard, so we can win. That, of course, when there was soccer and children were playing soccer on teams together. So for me, step 2 is then identify how it is part of everyday life. If I were to ask my niece, what would you see and what would you hear if you saw somebody doing something hard? She might say, I would see myself practicing a lot, practicing by myself and with my team. I would hear us cheering when we got it and maybe yelling at each other when we didn't. I've been to her soccer games. I can tell you this does happen. Then the third part, step 3, would be to say, let's show what it is to do something hard. You can choose to create a picture, make a training video, or write the directions for a hard play that you would share with your teammate. What would you like to do? My niece might say, I'd like to make a picture that shows the play moves for soccer so I can share it with my teammates. Okay, so she now has a definition and an understanding, which is the level which is appropriate for right now, of what it means to persevere or to do something hard. One important note here: you know your students the best, and we recognize that not all students have access to technology or parental involvement in an equitable manner. I encourage you to really think about the list of step 3 choices and adapt them to your context. My niece happens to live in a well-resourced family in a well-resourced community, so her choices make sense for her. They may not make sense for another child, and we need to be mindful of that. So I have been extremely efficient with my time, which you may or may not appreciate right now. Jerome, if there are a couple of frequently asked questions, can we address them here? If not, that's great too. If a question arises later or you're watching this at a later time, you can please feel free to contact me at the email address.
So we have a question here in the Q&A from Leslie. I'll read it out to you, and then you can respond.
Okay.
So she writes, I think the challenge comes when we need to show children how to generalize these skills across settings.
Yes.
Many children can tell you what it means to be kind, but when they are frustrated in math or art or PE, remembering or generalizing what it means to be kind when frustrated is hard. We as teachers practice on working on this with our kids regularly. Working with parents on how to work with their children in multiple settings when they are trying to teach their children from home is what I'm struggling with. Many of my parents are just giving up. Any suggestions?
Yeah. I think a lot of parents are giving up, and I appreciate Leslie. It was Leslie, correct?
Yes.
I want to make sure I have the name right. Thank you. I appreciate that you have shown a little skill, something that's further down the road, but is absolutely out there, and that is the generalization of skills. It is very hard for us, even as adults, to take skills from one context to another. So one strategy that I have used in the past is to ask the parent what is one thing that they might do to help their child. Right now, they may not be able to answer that. I cannot imagine, quite frankly, what some of our families are experiencing right now. If I do imagine it, I imagine that it is even more difficult than it was before we were all at home all the time with each other. So in addition to asking the parent what they might do, you also might want to ask the parent what strength or where they might have seen their child do something like the skill that you're trying to generalize. It's not all awful. There are times when kids will do and will use a skill. So to be mindful of that and to have the parent recognize that would also give the parent a little bit of confidence that, okay, this is happening. Remember, for some of our parents, I think it's really hard for them to look for the positives and the strengths in their children because sometimes it's hard for them to see them. And I will share a quick story, and then that's related to this. I've done a fair amount of parent training of parents of students with disabilities. And one of the first activities I always did with them was tell me the strengths of your child. It was always very eye-opening to me to listen to the number of parents who say, my child doesn't have any. That's a very sad statement for us to hear. So let's shore up the parent would be my suggestion just a little bit. I know our worry is the child, but sometimes you have to help the parent look for the positive or see the spark so the parent can continue to support the child at home. Anything else, Jerome?
Hey, Deb. This is a question that I just thought of right now.
Absolutely.
Out of all the skill domains that are in like the Fisher and Fry research or in the Castle framework, is there any one that you would recommend beginning with that might be easier to explain to parents or easier to help them develop activities to work on with their kids? Like if people are looking for a place to start with this, is there one area that you think might be better than others?
I do. Well, for right now, in the context that we're in, I think always identifying our emotions is a great place to start as a skill. Now, remember that we're not being therapeutic today. We're not really working on that. But if we were, it would be, how do I feel? What is my feeling? Identifying that. Or as a second choice, I'll give three, would be, what does kindness look like? We're talking a lot about kindness. Kids hear a lot about kindness if their parents are thinking about the news or watching the news. So how do I feel? Or kindness or gratitude. One of the things we're also seeing in this time is a lot of gratitude for our frontline workers, our medical professionals, our essential workers. How do we show gratitude for someone who is working really hard to help us through this difficult time? So those would be a choice. One of those three or all of those three would be good first steps.
Thanks, Deb. Does anybody else have anything? You can type it in the chat box. I mean, if not, you can feel free to shoot us an email and we'll get back to you. You know, oh, hang on, got one over here. Oh, that's more of a statement and less of a question, but I agree. Okay, here we go. Here's one from Carl. So being a bridge between the parents and students at one end with all of their needs, frustrations, and anxieties, and the administration at the other end, requiring that we normalize and move forward with remote and distance learning is super stressful. When I want to stop and be with my kids, just spend time with them rather than teach them,
Yeah.
I am anxious that I am not living up to my admin's expectations.
Yeah.
So where does educator SEL come into play, and how do we address that?
Mm-hmm. I think that is a great question, Carl. Thank you for that. It has to be, I can't even imagine how difficult and challenging that might be. And I have days when I'm alternately very glad I retired last year and very sad I retired last year because I'm not able to be in the thick of it to help out. I think, first of all, you need to be aware of whatever your administrator kind of general expectations are. So you need to be aware of that. But you also need to be aware of where you are. And we could do a whole thing on how to do self-care and what you need to pay attention to. But I think it's important for you to identify where you are, what you can reasonably get done, which is why for this protocol, I've kept it real simple. It's just about, let's just identify and define some social emotional skills if we're working with families. If you can integrate this into other things that you're doing, even better. Because the more you can integrate and put together, hopefully the less stress that will happen for you and for your students and for your own children. If there's ever an opportunity to combine what you might want to do with your children and your students, there's a win-win-win all the way around. So you can be thoughtful about that. But most importantly, try with whatever positive means you have to take care of yourself. It is hard to be a bridge right now. No one has ever done this before. I am hopeful, and what I am hearing from most of the teachers, I do work and coach with some administrators as well, is that everybody's trying to remember the emotionally vulnerable state we are all in, because that is true, and work with that. So take care of yourself, look at where you can combine for activities for both your students and with your own children. If that works out, that might help alleviate a little bit of stress.
Thanks, Carl. Thanks, Deb. All right, got another one here from Linda. She says, I teach FACS to self-contained students. I'm dual licensed teacher. My students include nonverbal and verbal students with and without physical challenges. I'm trying to support them with visuals, etc. However, some students are not logging on to Google Classroom in order to participate in my class. Yeah. What are some suggestions to increase student participation while decreasing stress for them and their parents? The special ed teachers have recommended that I not contact parents directly since they are already working with them.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you, Linda, for thinking about that whole idea of using visuals with students who do not communicate verbally like the rest of us do. I think that the reality is that we will have some students with disabilities or some students without disabilities who may have experienced great trauma in their life, who are now in this very upside down world who cannot function the way they did. And we don't know yet how to help them. So if your special ed teachers are in contact with those families, I would perhaps suggest that you consider asking them what daily living skill that student might be working on, either gaining independence or working on tolerating, depending upon the level of the child's disability, and see if then you could narrow it down to one skill for a student that they can work on, that they have some experience with, or they were working on before we all started learning at home, and that they could continue to work on. And perhaps your special education partner then could be that conduit to share that information with the family, and you could go about it that way. So what is the most important thing, or what is one thing for one student who's really challenged to log on now to Google Classroom to be part of the class? What might be one thing that they can do? Because the reality is they are most likely now not even dealing with things in an emotional response. They're in survival mode and they're shutting down because it's just not what I know. My whole routine is now something different. That's going, if they don't have strong skills, that's most likely going to be a challenge for the parents as well. And so how you can narrow it as to one thing, just one thing for right now, I think would be a great way to approach it. Thank you.
All right, we got another one. This is from Tim. Any recommendations or resources for staff to continue SEL supports for students who truly struggle with SEL, such as students who have social emotional special class placements?
Yep. So a couple of different things. When you get the resource guide tomorrow, I have put some, I think, are some of the right now most current and easiest to use. So thank you, Tim, for the question. Recommendations. So a couple of different things. CASEL itself, their website is putting out a lot of information related to social emotional learning right now and the COVID-19 quarantine that we are all in. So they are a great resource. They have a newsletter. You can sign up for notifications, and they are trying to make their materials as easy to use as possible. So I would definitely look at that website. A second one that I noted was the Conscious Discipline website, which is Becky Bailey's work. In my district, when we were facing a very significant change of student population, and our teachers recognized we need to do something a little different, we actually engaged in a research process, and then they selected a program that we implemented at our elementary school. So on the Conscious Discipline website, though, right now, they have free resources that they are extending to educators and families around COVID-19 and trying to learn at home. So those two that you will see tomorrow, or if you just want to go out onto the Google and search for them, are two really good resources. Right now, they're free resources, and they're trying to make them very easy to use. Thank you.
All right. Does anybody else have any other questions they'd like to put in the Q&A or the chat box here for us before we adjourn for the evening? No?
No.
All right. Well,
Okay.
if you think of any questions, oh wait, yes, the webinar's handouts are being emailed to you tomorrow.
Yeah.
You could expect that in the morning. And yeah, if you think of any questions in the coming days, or if you share it with your colleagues and they think of any questions, please email Debbie at the email address here on the slide, or you can email me at jasteele@casdany.org. Ken, for emails, our attendance policy right now is everyone gets the recording, and we trust their good faith that they are going to watch it, and we give them credit in this time. So if there's nothing else,
Jerome?
yes.
If I may, before you say goodbye to everybody, I'd just like to do a couple of things. I'd just like to thank you for your patience with me as I am venturing into this world, all of you who participated today and will watch this webinar later. I feel your pain. I know your pain, but now we have done it. We have done the hard thing and we have done it together. But I'd like to share with you and leave you with this thought from a truly timeless person, Mr. Rogers. I'm convinced that when we help our children find healthy ways of dealing with their feelings, ways that don't hurt them or anyone else, we're helping make the world a better, a safer, better place. So thank you everybody for your time today. You can do these things that you're trying to do. You are doing great and heroic work out there in the field. Please know that people recognize it and we thank you for it. All right, Jerome, back to you.
I don't think I can really say anything better than Mr. Rogers. So I think that's it, everybody. Have a good night, and you can expect an email from me tomorrow. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.